All right. Hello, everyone. Good to be back with you. Today, we are talking about Jupiter and specific focus on the themes of optimism and pessimism. I'm going to start off with a song. And this song is actually a song about giving, but we'll see why I feel this is so relevant and important to today's topic. And I just got a new mic, so I'm super excited about the sound quality, and I think it'll pick up the guitar pretty well too. Nay, 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 nay. Nay, 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 nay. Nay, 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 nay. Nay, 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 nay. Fill me up so I may give. I may give so I may live in emptiness and certainty, confident in all I be. Emptiness and certainty, confident in all I be. Day, 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 day. Day, 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 day. Giving is the way to find what you've got. You're rich inside, so let it go that you may see all the wealth that lives in thee. So let it go that you may see all the wealth that lives in thee. Nay, 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 nay. Nay, 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 nay. Nay, 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 nay. Nay, 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 nay. So I speak about giving and the theme of when we give, there's a quality of receiving through the act of giving, simply because in the giving, we are tasting, we are running through our own system, the wealth that we have. And there's that cosmic haha that when we hold what we have inside, we don't experience and realize what we have inside because it's not being experienced, it's not moving, it's not flowing. So the flow, the dynamic of giving and sharing our inner abundance is the way of experiencing and realizing our own abundance. And what happens with Jupiter in a healthy state of mind, there's this incredible appreciation for how rich life is. And when I say how rich life is, it's also how rich we are. We can't make that separation. Like if a person's in this mindset of seeing how many opportunities in life there are, how there's so many doors open and so many wonderful things unfolding, and there's just a respect and reverence for what is working so well. Simultaneous, there's this deep appreciation and awareness of one's uniqueness, one's specialness in life. When we're attuned to the flow of life, there's an inherent awareness of our individual destiny. This is something very important with Jupiter that we often don't understand entirely. Jupiter does correspond to our own personal path in life. Personal path. Within each one of us, according to our own soul individuality, there's a journey to walk, and this journey is tailored, is constructed perfectly for our own personal realization. And so for each soul, there's a potential to become more and more aware of the unique opportunities and directions in life that are relevant to ourselves. So for me, if I'm going to have a realization of going bigger with my music and sharing my song more, and I'm going to start seeing opportunities and how life is aligning itself in reverence, in support to that, in respect to that, that's so personal and relevant to my own destiny, to my own unfolding. And thus with Jupiter, we really connect with our own nature. We are one with where we are going. There's no path in life that isn't one with who we are. This is such an important piece to understand because we often hold and create this false duality between where we are, what's happening, our sense of self, and this fuzzy notion of where we're trying to get in life, our dreams, our aspirations, our visions, to the point that we create this separation and we forget that our path is one with our nature. And so we never actually, although we do, need to seek beyond ourselves, need to seek beyond getting to know who we are and what's true for us, what's authentic for us. Because the path that is laid out before us, our unique journey, is shaped and tailored so perfectly with our own individual nature, with who we are. And so in a state of optimism, there's an attunement, there's an awareness of life being perfectly orchestrated in resonance with our own nature. And philosophically, what this means is we recognize that life is in resonance with itself. That what arises along our own journey and along anyone's journey couldn't be separate from what we are. And so any kind of nihilism or meaninglessness doesn't fit into that because there's no separation. There's no dissonance between the path that is unfolding to where we are going and where we are and what we are. Thus, in a state of optimism, and optimism is a very common Jupiter keyword, there's very, very little space to feel alienated. There's very little space in optimism to feel out of place in one's life, to feel like, oh, I don't belong here. This is not where I'm supposed to be, or there's somewhere, something else. Because how can that manifest? How can that thought form possibly thrive if there's a total understanding and respect that life is unfolding in resonance with who we are and that we are one with where we are going? So in that state of consciousness, everything is seen as an opportunity. Everything is seen as a stepping stone, which is sort of a testament of faith and wisdom. It's a testament that says, I am pretty much going to live as if this is relevant. I'm going to live as if this moment isn't some arbitrary, I'm not supposed to be here kind of moment. And so coming back to this idea of giving, we can only really give our gifts and share our wealth, share our abundance in that state of mind, right? It's like we become impoverished deeply when we think we're not where we're meant to be, when there's some other thing that needs to happen before we can get to this thing that we're trying to get to. When we hold ourselves in alienation to this present moment and to our life, we can't really appreciate our relationships. We can't really appreciate the opportunities and the gifts that are within us to be shared. And so the opposite of optimism is this psychology of pessimism. And we don't often sort of default think of Jupiter as pessimism, but it is like, oh boy, is it. I mean, if it's going to be optimism, it has to also be pessimism. That would be unfair to be a one-sided archetype. Because really, Jupiter is our perspective. It's our understanding, our comprehension of life. So how are we interpreting and internalizing our experience and making meaning out of it? How do we come to glean greater insight and knowledge about life and creation and our place within it? So it's everything about our cosmological point of view, our perspective. how we're going to interpret phenomenal reality. Um, recently a dear friend of mine had a dream. And I won't share the dream. I didn't get any consent for that. But the dream was sort of like, a scary dream. It involved a baby and some sadness and loss and and one of the fears that arose was, oh, I wonder if this is like foretelling of something or is like a negative sign. But the perspective that arose for me is like, oh yeah, well, that baby is you, and this is actually speaking about something in you that you're just beginning to give love to. And it was like, oh yeah, that's so true. And so often in our life experiences, whether it's dreams or relationships or anything happening in our life, it's scary, it's difficult, it's painful. It's not like a positive experience in terms of how it makes us feel. But where we interpret it, where we immediately go into um, this story that says, oh, well, then there's something wrong, right? That's where we actually begin to create our own suffering. And the suffering of pessimism within Jupiter is a really existential experience of never belonging. Like there's a certain trauma in the Jupiter archetype of never belonging. It's like a perpetual state of alienation. So if I had a dream, I could use a good example for I'm looking at my bed right now. Like, where's that dream that I had? You know, um, if I have, nothing's coming to mind, but if I had this negative dream, I can hold that as like this weight and this projection of things are going bad, things are going wrong. But if I come back to this curiosity about my own soul directive, and then I can remember, okay, it's not about painting everything with a rose color, but there's a wisdom in remembering that my path in life is real, that life isn't about suffering, that the purpose of my existence isn't to have a horrible time, that there is a greater cosmic intelligence underlying my entire incarnation, my being here. And to just come into that, for me, it's not, again, like denying negative feelings and difficult feelings, but it's just sort of returning to a broader perspective that, again, it doesn't negate what's arising emotionally, but it helps me remember the larger perspective. There's a overall optimism to life. And this is not something that I can rationally or empirically prove or explain. But whenever I look inside, that's what I find. Whenever I step aside from my deeper or more immediate surface concerns, I return to this sense of, oh, there's an unfolding of love, of consciousness. Like there's a great realization unfolding here. And I can see that in myself, and I can see that in every being. And there's something profoundly sacred and special about this experience here. It's an intuition that points me to this being much greater than maybe often what it appears to be, than my immediate interpretation of things. And when I hold that and I kind of meet my sense of alienation or not here-ness or not belongingness to that greater sense of there's meaning, there's purpose, there's value, something greater than what I understand right now, but I feel it. It creates spaciousness to look at things differently. And so much of the existential suffering and non-belonging that comes with Jupiter is just our insistence upon landing upon a mentality. There's like this Jupiter archetype, and I'm going to paint it for you in a certain way. We all know this person, maybe we are this person, we've been this person. It's sort of just like this archetype of this, like, maybe older person, kind of set in their ways, and they've had a lot of experience, like a lot of spiritual realizations, and have traveled a really deep life. But there's a certain quality of settling, right? It's like you ask them about love, and they'll say, oh, there's love is just an emotion, and there's no real love. And there might be a lot of wisdom in what they're saying, but you can feel it. Like there's a quality of settling. Like at some point they decided that the journey's over. And let's not confuse this with the Saturn depression and like sort of giving up on life, like the heaviness, like, all right, forget, I'm just going to stop living because this is so hard and difficult and I, have to repress everything. It's different than that. It's a cosmology that basically settled at a certain point in this concept of nothing more to learn, nothing more to experience. And when we settle there, we kind of like set up shop on a certain level of awareness. We set up shop at a certain level of consciousness. There might be a lot of gifts and wisdom there, but it'll be limited. And we're not going to be able to experience and see more of the truth. And with Jupiter, we need to really make sure that we're expanding, that we're continuing to see more, that we're not settling. At the same time, we don't want to be restless. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But to recognize there's always more to realize. Every awakened being is still realizing more of the truth. Like one of my favorite teachers is Adyashanti. And like, later in his life, he'd gotten into Carl Jung. Like, how cool is that? He's self-realized, but he's also still realizing. That's the teaching of spirituality. It's always being, but always becoming. Right? As long as there is an ego construct, a sense of self operating and living here, a personal subjective consciousness, that subjective consciousness is going to be interfacing with all that is. And there's always going to be more to realize. That's exciting. I mean, that's just a beautiful statement about reality. So in the consciousness of pessimism, there is a settling and a conviction that there's really nothing more to learn. And I want to really be clear about one of the shadows within the Jupiter archetype is this happy-go-lucky opportunism that sees everything as an opportunity to the point of never wanting to miss out on an opportunity. So in that sense, there's a lack of discernment, Virgo square to Sagittarius, no boundaries. Like, I'll just do whatever I want. I'm feeling lucky. I'm going to bet all of my money on the gambling. I'm going to, I'm hungry. So I'm going to like eat everything in my refrigerator and like make a really expensive meal. And we overload. We have experiences that then exceed our capacity to receive and integrate it. And so that psychology of overload, which maybe started off with a very optimistic and expansive and jolly point of view, can end in this profound pessimism. That's what happens psychologically when we've overloaded our system and we can't grow anymore. And if our sense of wellness was contingent upon this never-ending growth and expansion, then we'll feel very dreary and dark. Like there's actually a need within the Jupiter archetype to recoup and rest. It's a big part of the experience. Otherwise, we have no perspective. We lose the ability to see clearly. And it just becomes a non-ending restlessness. So in a state of overload, we can respond to that with more thoughts, more constructs, more ideas. I ate too much. Let me take something to help me feel better. Just taking and taking, but there's no intuition. There's no direct connection. There's no embodied awareness of what does my body need right now? And so we come back to optimism any moment that we reconnect with our own direct experience. And I want to be really clear, and I'm hoping this is clear, that I'm wanting to paint the notion of optimism not so much as an ism. So maybe let's say that, right? If it becomes an ism, then we're a little bit lost, because anything that becomes an ism is not about this present moment. It's a construct that we're falling back upon. And we're like, well, I'm an optimist. I'm into optimism. I practice Judaism, Taoism, optimism, whatever ism. If it's an ism, that's like my greatest critique, so to speak, of Taoism, which is an amazing tradition, and I've learned a lot from it. And yet there's this funny thing about Taoism, which is it's an ism. And like one of the first words of Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching was, you can't call it by a name. When you call it the Tao that's given a name isn't the eternal Tao. And so there's something really important in not letting optimism become a belief system, because that can be a Jupiter way of just continuing the excessiveness, the overindulgence, like where opportunities and good things becomes a belief system and we're no longer living in the moment. I really want to paint the notion of optimism as a natural state of awareness, a natural attunement to the resonance of life with ourself. And I want to give you a really tangible example. I'm, having a child in 6 weeks, and my friend, co-parent, and her son are living in the house right behind me. And so I'm spending a lot of time with this 6-year-old now. And I'll say two things. One, what he's teaching me is so Jupiter. I actually haven't even looked at his chart yet. Michelle's an astrologer, so she mentioned it, but I'm actually I'm wanting to look more into his Jupiter. He's so playful. Everything is an opportunity for play. Like everything. Like I built myself a little bench and I had some extra plywood. And he looked at the plywood and he's like, "Oh, cool. I can practice my skateboarding on this." Everything was an opportunity. And so he was. And then at some point he's like, "Can we make a fingerboard skating, a mini fingerboard skating park out of this wood?" And so we did. And we just went on YouTube, and I had 90% of the materials already here. And it was so cool to just watch his exuberance and his enthusiasm to create. But I want to explain this in this way. He saw the opportunities that were available because he's connected with his purpose. He's connected with his own nature. He's not looking for himself. He's not a seeker, and hopefully he never will be. There's that teaching, it's better not to start. But if you start, you better complete it. And what I mean by that is, once we develop the psychology of looking for something, there's something so innocent and true and sort of fundamental to our realization that's sort of forgotten, that we have to now kind of go full circle back to and practice and train ourselves to remember this fundamental starting point of our own nature. But we see this in children, and they can really become a teacher for us, and if we want them to, if we allow them. He's connected to his own nature, which is what? Well, his nature is, the things that he likes, the way he does things. It's he lives, he does things the way he does things. The dog does things the way the dog does things. It's it's very Winnie the Pooh. Winnie the Pooh is just very unadorned, very simple, very true to itself, and innocent in that way. And so, to use a dog as another example, dogs are so true to their nature that if I'm irritated, I'm also living with a dog. So if I'm irritated at him, the dog, Gizmo is his name, he will not respond to my irritation by doing all the human things that humans might do. He's just going to continue being himself. If he wants to play or go on a walk and I'm not wanting to do that, he's going to still be himself. And dogs can have different emotions and change fluidly, but there's no lying there. There's total sincerity. And he'll be true to whatever emotion he's experiencing, true to his nature. There's no constructs or strange philosophies or ideologies or modalities to practice, or how-to books, how to be a happy dog. He's just himself. And working with him, maybe down the road, we can, create training and discipline. And that's sort of the Capricorn dynamic coming into Capricorn Cancer polarity. Dogs are Cancer. But everything in life is true to itself, and that's Sagittarius Jupiter. And our own spiritual path in life, everything in our life is realized by being authentic with ourselves, our spirituality, our spiritual practices. If we have a teacher, if we're being instructed or guided in a certain way, the gem of our own spirituality is not just doing something to get somewhere, it's being true to ourselves. And it's such a beautiful meditation that our practice, our journey of realization, our journey of awakening, is about becoming really curious about who we are, what our nature is. and setting a path in life, walking a path in life where we are creating a structure, creating a system, creating not a structure, but embracing the opportunities, walking the path that feels authentic. It's like for him to build a miniature skate park. It's authentic for him. It's like so right for his own development and who he is as a being. And so this is optimism. Most of us, when we see wood, we're just going to see wood, right? But those creative types, right? You'll see wood, you'll see like a palette or the next project. But for the most part, like the older we get, we've stopped having fun. We've stopped really getting curious. I'm seeing a lot of comments. I'm just going to take a moment and see what's being spoken about. Okay, yeah, Carolyn, we'll get to you a little later for sure. We lose that spontaneous, like in the moment connection to all the abundance that life is offering us. So I'll share another story. I have Jupiter on the IC in the 4th house, and the week of my Jupiter return, I moved into this home. I suddenly inherited a family, pretty much. So I'm, supporting them. I'm taking care of Michelle's needs in many ways, and have included in my own personal sphere a larger reality that encompasses family, caring for other beings. And my Jupiter on the IC in the 4th house has been very pessimistic about family. So the psychology of Jupiter relative to pessimism is that alienation, not belonging, not here, not now, and this need for freedom. But that need for freedom, when it becomes a thing, itself is really rooted in this core belief that I can't be myself. Like, what's the core of alienation? What's the core of the pessimism that comes with Jupiter? It's this deep belief and conviction that the truth isn't good enough, that the truth isn't safe, which means being true to myself can't happen here. Being authentically me can't happen here. So we have, the orientation within the Jupiter archetype, which is like, hey, how are you doing? Oh, I'm great. Like, no, you're not. I mean, that's just like an exaggerated expression of something, but it's not really authentic or sincere. Then we have the other expression, like, how are you doing? And just sort of like going into some sort of story about one's life, but that's not really true either. It's just a story. The answer with Jupiter, and this is not to make it too specific, but the general direction for that is to find out, like, how are you doing? And the answer might not be, I don't have any words right now, or like, I don't know. Like, if you're feeling sort of dissociated, that's the answer. If there's nothing to say, there's nothing to say. If there's something that wants to be shared or expressed, or an authentic expression, that's there too. Like the way that we trick ourselves into thinking, well, here I can't be myself, so I have to lie and be someone else, or try to tell a good story to make it look like I'm participating with life, or just like get out of here as soon as possible. So for me, family, 4th house, has always been a place where I felt like I can't really belong. This is not for me. So emotional alienation, Jupiter in the 4th house. And thus, Jupiter is where we can alienate other people, underappreciate others via a generally pessimistic attitude towards life, not really be present for other people or other experiences or the places that we're at. So there's been an ongoing sort of expansion of awareness where there's a certain threshold of human emotion and tenderness and vulnerability that have been uncomfortable for me, because I have not really believed that there's anywhere where I can feel it, anywhere that I'm safe enough to experience it. And in the 4th house, we have a womb. We need safety. There's a correlation in the 4th house with being touched, with being held, knowing that you're loved, that you belong. And so this Jupiter return experience for me is really confronting me with my own pessimism around home and family. And there's healing happening where I'm, softening and cultivating a more, what's the word? A greater respect and appreciation for the opportunities that life is presenting itself to me. And relative to giving, like, oh, when I have a home and a family, I have so much to give. I'm a nurturer. I'm a carer. I love caring for people. I love making people feel good and loved and seen and heard. So all these different ways that I'm like paying attention to, how can I, be a positive presence in Dylan's life? How can I support Michelle? How can I support the dog? Like, how can I make this home feel more loving and nurturing? And there's no way I can do that. There's no way I can cultivate this generosity of giving if I'm holding this like I don't belong here. So it's funny. I have my van out in the front. Haven't lived in my van. You see, this is my home. Like, this is my first, I think, Zoom meeting video in my actual home. Total for the past, almost 2 years, I've never been out of my van for this long. So it's a completely new experience for me. And so that's what I want to say about pessimism and optimism. And I want to share some fun slides with you here. Okay. So this is a nice Winston Churchill. A pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity. An optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. And the reason why this is so right on and so true is when we're tuned into, remember, I'm defining optimism. It comes from the word optimal. So it sees that life is optimal for itself. It's attuned to the notion that life is always in resonance with where it's going. Simple as that. Nothing's irrelevant to life, and thus nothing's irrelevant to our own destiny, to our own journey. And I wanted to also make a point around depression and negative states of mind, because we have, pessimism and depression and low attitudes can be a Pisces thing, can be a Capricorn thing, can be a Sagittarius thing. Many of the archetypes can manifest a low state of mind. And I spoke a little bit about this, but I just want to offer that note that when we speak about Jupiter and Sagittarius pessimism, the core of it roots in a belief system of not belonging, a belief system in the truth being unsafe. Thus, I can't drop into it. Be it you ate too much and you're overloaded, you had too many relationships, you gave too much, you are traveling because you don't really belong anywhere, you don't have enough money to pay rent. Like, whatever the situation is, the core of it is this disconnect and this alienation from what's true right now. And thus this belief that we need to seek some other solution. We need to go into something else that will answer the problem for us. And, and that's just really different than the Pisces depression, which is like this existential, like, absolute meaninglessness in life. It's not so much about my personal belonging, but more about like, why is there so much suffering? What's the point of all of this? And then I mentioned the Capricorn, which is the heaviness and the weight and the burden of one's life and the repression that comes in being so conditioned by one's place or one's role in life and not accessing one's feeling body. So here's a cute animation. The source for this animation is at the end. Here's an optimistic approach to life, right? Here's optimism and here's life. Boom. And that's where that ends. That's where that cartoon ends. What will this person do afterwards? Well, if they turn towards like this negative attitude, that negative attitude is different than their experience of pain. If they cultivate a negative attitude and a pessimistic perspective on life, that's adding something to the pain that they're feeling. Our pain and our difficulties don't have to be linked with a negative outlook. That's an extra piece that we add to it. Pessimistic approach to life. Here we have pessimism and life, and boom. And this is from owlturd.com. That's the humor and the tragedy and the beauty of pessimism. We're holding this attitude of life is antagonistic to our own being, to our own nature, and we're hurting ourselves right then and there. So I want to read to you. I've been writing articles on Jupiter for a few months now. I think I'm done with the articles. I feel like I'm done because the energy for it's gone. And so, put all together, it's a little over 30 pages. So that might just be a little mini book. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. But I want to read you an excerpt from this. For the expanded consciousness of Sagittarius. Oh, wait a minute. Forget that. Let me continue sharing my screen again with you, because I need to set this up a little bit. And then you will see exactly where I'm going with this. So my last slide is this. It's a little fuzzy. This is a yodel relationship between Sagittarius, Taurus, and Cancer. In a way, Taurus and Cancer couldn't be more different than Sagittarius. And I guess that's sort of like what a yode's about. So yode is when two planets are 150 degrees from a nodal point, from like an apex point. So the nature of a yod in general is sort of like, how do I do that? So Sag is like journey, expansion, growth, which means there's always more. But then Taurus is about here now. It's very much about embodiment. It's so stable. So, Sag is like, how do I do that if I'm growing? And that's the point. The Taurus Sagittarius yod is be here now, embody, arrive, settle, have your realization here. Don't be in a perpetual restlessness and seeking. And what's the Cancer Sagittarius situation? So Sag is expanding and growing, and Cancer is the emotional body. It requires presence and safety. Whereas Sag, mutable fire, is constantly seeing the next thing. It's constantly expanding into the next insight. And this can create a deep sense of never being able to rest and really experience the human life. Cancer is our human life. And Sagittarius is our realization. So this is like living our realizations as a human being, bringing that into our family, into our relationships. And so the yod between Sagittarius, Taurus, and Cancer is basically reflecting this challenge with the Jupiter archetype, where there can be this deep resistance to integrating and settling and receiving and embodying the wisdom. And so when we're in a pessimistic state of mind, what are we negating? What are we not experiencing? This moment, right? We can't be nourished by life. We can't feel content and held and safe and full in a pessimistic mentality. Because again, the way I'm defining pessimism is an underlying fear and belief that the truth isn't good enough. Thus, my nature isn't belonging here. It doesn't fit here. Thus, this is not where I'm meant to be. So I'll read you this little excerpt from my little book that's soon to come. For the expanded consciousness of Sagittarius to embrace the challenge of this yodel relationship with Taurus and Cancer is to come full circle back to right now, the journey without distance, the path that leads you to where you started, the pilgrimage, the most intimate place there is, the green grass that is currently growing under your feet, wet with the moisture of the breathing earth, growing and alive in this moment. Jupiter is where we can really appreciate life. It's where we can see the inherent opportunity for growth and wisdom inherent in life experiences. So with Jupiter, we sit by the river and we uncover the principles of the Tao. We had this direct experience of life showing us our own nature, showing us the way life goes. That's what we do with Jupiter. We learn. We realize the nature of reality. And if we humble ourselves, we can learn these lessons everywhere we go. If we are willing to know our lives as a pilgrimage, then life will always show us more and guide us along. It's the moment that we see that we're not on the pilgrimage, that we're done, that we've stopped, that there's nothing more to learn, that we've already arrived. It's that moment that whether we are aware of it or not, there's a certain pessimism that creeps in, a certain point where opportunity and the optimumness of life isn't seen, and thus where we begin to underappreciate the beauty and thus underappreciate the gifts that we have to share. So that completes the speaking portion of today's talk. And let's open it up to questions. And I'm happy to talk more about this. And if anyone wants to look into their charts, we can explore this a little bit for you as well. Oh, here, stop the share. Okay.
Hi, Ari.
Hey, Carolyn.
How are you?
Great. Good to see you.
Um, I think Linda's putting up my chart now. Can you hear me, Linda?
Yeah.
Yeah, my
Yes.
sound okay? I've been having my Jupiter return
Yes.
and now it's kind of leaving. And there's a few other things that are happening, like my progressed moon is I think sitting on my ascendant as of today. There's a few major changes, and I'm certainly not. Oh, I had a Mercury return not so long ago, and just I'm wondering what shape my life is going to take. It's like Grandma Moses started painting at 80.
Yeah. That's it.
And it's like I I and I'm not blaming. I chose the life that I led, that my parents, whatever, but I grew up hearing it's all in your mind. I was taught to, in this life and probably past lives, taught to not trust my own thought process, which is really very good. So now I'm trusting it. Trust is
Mhm.
my issue now. Like I'm beginning to trust myself. But I tell you, today I had sharp, lengthy pangs of pessimism. And I did my rituals, I did my meditating, I did my stuff. So I don't feel as hopeless, but it's not
Carolyn,
that
I'm getting the
pessimism.
bulk of what you're saying, but half of, maybe like 20% of your words are blinking out, but I'm getting the essence of it.
I'm sure you will.
Yeah.
So do you want me to talk more or?
If there's more to share, I just wanted to let you know, like, I didn't hear the last sentence.
I think I was repeating
Yeah.
what I'd said before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So I'll feel free to share more once I start speaking. I just want to say that because I was missing a lot of the words anyway. You said it. Grandma Moses began painting at 80. And this is basically where you've learned that your intuition isn't valid, which is another way of saying that the truth doesn't belong here. And you're a great example because you have this moon in Virgo in the sixth, which is, of course, an internal reality of self-doubt, but also that self-doubt equals perpetual procrastination. It's like gifts and skills that can be used and directed and utilized, squaring that Jupiter. And so it's all like seeing the abundance you have inside of you, seeing what is right in front of you, and being able to, Jupiter, understand, almost like glean insight and realize, like, oh, the impoverished attitude that I've held is because I didn't believe it was safe to be myself. I didn't believe that being authentically me was good enough. So I had to try to fit into being something else that is not me. And now that the Jupiter return has happened, you're in that new phase, and this is just going to unfold for you. Like, that's the nature of Jupiter passing over Jupiter. It's now like for me, it's the same thing. We have the same Jupiter, It's like we're now in this new Jupiter journey, and it's time to experience it and learn from it. Like, the journey is just beginning here. And it's cool to see how that will continue to unfold for you as Jupiter, makes its first semi-sextile at 30 degrees, and then a semi-square at 45, and its first square at 90, and so forth.
Yeah.
All these different cycles that'll just sort of like bring more awareness of fundamentally how relevant your nature is, like how relevant your personal truth, And what does that speak to? It's like all the things that you love, all the things that are authentic for you, that resonate with your soul. That's your path. Like that, it's as simple as that. And a lot of people, when they do sessions with me, they'll ask me like, am I allowed to like follow my path, as an artist? Or is it okay for me to make a lot of money? And it's these questions that we like to ask where we're afraid that maybe it's not my karma. Maybe it's not my lot in this lifetime to enjoy myself. And what I always like to say is, if our desires are sincere, and if our sense of like personal relevance is authentic, then it gives us freedom. Like for me, music, even though I often have a lot of self-doubt and I often feel very far from where I want to be, and question my whole path, there's no doubt about it that whenever I take any step in my life towards my musical career and completing my album, which is like really, really, really close, um, it feels so right for me. It's like the most authentic feeling of like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And there's nothing outside of us that can validate those feelings for us. Jupiter, it's fire. So fire is individual. It really means going out alone and having nothing else to depend upon. When you're on that pilgrimage with Jupiter, what makes the journey so exciting, what makes it so invigorating, is that we're really open and trusting that life is relevant for us. Like Dylan, that saw the plywood and saw how the plywood was relevant for him.
Yeah.
Do you want
Mm,
to share anything else, Carolyn, or ask anything?
just quickly, just that you said to me a couple of summers ago, I think now, I said, I was having a rough time and I was very pessimistic. And I said, when is my life going to start? When am I going to get on my path? And I remember you saying, but it's all your path.
Mm,
And that really resonated. And I thank you for
mm,
that.
mm.
Think of that often, and it's good. Thank you, Ari. That was an excellent share.
That's really sweet. Thanks for sharing that with me. That's really good advice. I'm glad that you reminded me of that. Yeah. All right. So we have a question from Amanda. Hi, Amanda. I've noticed many famous people like David Bowie, for example, had Jupiter in the 12th, this eye for opportunities. Do you feel that their Jupiter could have brought the abundance of fame to them? Mm-hmm. I'm intrigued by the pattern of all the Jupiters. Absolutely. Jupiter in the 12th house is like, so, anything in the 12th house can orient towards fame. Like that's just like a general, because in the 12th house, we become universalized. So whatever functions playing out in the 12th house becomes impersonal to our own self, and it sort of is given to life. So we become an agent of life, and water will flow wherever it wants to flow. So like for better or for worse, everything in the 12th house can really um, become an icon. It can become, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, yeah, it can become its own like deified universal expression of consciousness in some way. Um, let's tune into the nature of Jupiter in the 12th house itself. Jupiter in the 12th house, relative to the psychology of optimism, is in seeing the benevolence of spirit, seeing the benevolence of life and oneness. And there's a strong impulse within consciousness to transcend and to have an understanding of life that allows for a deeper inclusion and unity of all things. So a lot of popes actually historically have Jupiter in the 12th house. Or President Obama, he has Jupiter in the 12th house as well. And it's this whole thing where like his running became this like whole vision, this movement. But what's the issue with Jupiter in the 12th house? It can become like this very big, larger than life ideal of like utopia, of everything being perfect and divine and holy, whether it's like political or social or religious. And then it can just sort of become disillusioned by the actual reality of things. And so the pessimism with Jupiter in the 12th house is the apex of nihilism. Like, there's no purpose in life, there's no hope. Like, being a religious person that has so much faith and belief and trust, and then realizing that people suffer anyway. So in this case, like the opportunism, the consciousness within Jupiter becomes linked to conditions. And whenever you link conditions in the 12th house, you suffer. You become disillusioned because 12th house is beyond conditions. Um, Otherwise, anyone with like a message or something that is bringing something forth that is of insight, that expands consciousness in the 12th house, that can become super big. I haven't looked at David Bowie's chart. Um, I'm open to hear anything else that you might want to share about that, Amanda. If you wanted to get up and share a couple thoughts about David Bowie.
She's actually in the Facebook Live group.
Oh, okay, fine.
Yeah, so
So it
she
is.
typed that out. But Della has a question. Go
Yes,
ahead,
Della.
Della.
So yeah, just my question is about, I have Jupiter and Saturn both in Virgo in the second house. And they're conjunct by sign. I guess they're 13 degrees apart. And so I guess I was just curious, like, about just Jupiter when Saturn's really close and or in
Yeah,
Virgo.
great. So I'll speak to that relationship in general. We often think of Jupiter as, expansion, and then Saturn is contraction. Saturn is consolidation, and Jupiter is expansion. Contraction isn't the right terminology for Capricorn, because it's just not accurate. It's not about contracting, it's consolidating, it's compressing, it's internalizing and crystallizing what has been realized. And of course, the relationship between Jupiter's expansion and orientation to grow and see more is very beautifully balanced by Saturn, which wants to consolidate and create a structural reality where the realizations can be lived and made practical. So Jupiter is spontaneous and unstructured. Saturn is not spontaneous. It's planned and it's consciously intended, and it grows over time. So in general, the Saturn-Jupiter phasal relationship, any aspect between Saturn and Jupiter, corresponds to how we are developing the maturity and the wisdom in our own life to consciously apply and integrate and crystallize our realizations. So like an example of that for anyone is like you meditate and you have an insight. Saturn is then the discipline to apply that and actually take the steps in life to apply the changes that are necessary to really eat and digest that realization. When we have the balsamic conjunction, it's a matter of bringing to a completion an entire karmic cycle that pertains to your beliefs, your understanding, and allowing everything that you've learned and that you've come to know to give itself over to a new way of living, to really crystallize in this life in a way that is stable and solid and self-respecting. So let's take a moment. I'll tune into your chart and I'll breathe it in, and I'll offer a perspective on this for you. Will you tell me a little bit about what kind of work you do, Della Luna? And like, how do you support yourself? What kind of work do you do?
I do several things, but I used to be a garden teacher at an elementary school for many years. And then recently I switched to the cannabis industry. And yeah, so I also am an artist. but general background, like education and
Great,
horticulture. Yeah.
great, thank you. And that just helps me get a little context. And so I'm going to just, see what comes through. The correlation of all those things you spoke to, like garden educator, working in the cannabis industry, that's all Virgo in the second house. And second house being farming, um, anything that relates to plants, growing, cultivating. The connection here between Jupiter and Saturn is this vision for possibility. Jupiter's lots of growth, right? So it's the abundance of the earth. And Virgo is the ability to work it, to toil it, to cultivate technique and skill that relates to our survival and resources or plants and things that are helpful and healing. And Jupiter is basically, there's a lot of that. There's so many gifts of the earth and ways to work with that. And Saturn is the industry. Like Saturn is this path that's really about making it functional, accessible. It can be even relating to getting into the mainstream or making the Jupiter teachings, the Jupiter knowledge, or the Jupiter insights of plants accessible so that it can be taught and structured, and a path can be created that's accessible to the common people, to everyone. It could even be working with legalities and things like that. See, Jupiter by itself doesn't need to teach a certification course. It doesn't need to become legal or get credentialed or whatever. When you put Saturn there, you're crystallizing all of it so that it's accessible. It can be passed on to future generations. So then even your art, right? Same thing, Virgo in the second house. Of course, you have, Leo Sun, Leo North Node. So there's a lot of creative energy in there. Then you have, Chiron and Taurus in the 10th house. So I think the more I'm looking at it, there's so much important energy when it comes to the Earth archetype, and the Taurus in the 10th really resonates as well with your work in the world, and that coming from a very personally true place within you, that is deriving from your own inner authority, and that is trining that Jupiter and that Saturn. And so I think the artistry and the artfulness, the beauty of whatever it is you do, is also really contained. Virgo in the second house is crafting beauty, and then doing something practical and useful that is actually of service and making it accessible to others. And the fact of the balsamic connection, I think, is a part of what makes it let me find the right words. It moves your life more and more in the direction of orienting towards service, orienting towards life in a way that allows your understanding, your optimistic view, your expanded knowing of what is possible in life and what is healing, what is of service. It moves you to sort of spiritualize and open that up. That's balsamic in general, to crystallize that, to create something that has roots. Yeah. Do you want to speak to any of this or ask anything further to clarify?
I just thank you. Yeah, it's a lot I want to sit with, and I just appreciate it because having Saturn so close to my Jupiter, I've heard about expansion, but I haven't really internally lived it. There's always the Saturn is the fact checker or whatever.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
So thanks
Yeah.
for explaining. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Sure. And that's one thing about Saturn. And we can stop sharing. That's one thing about Saturn, Jupiter in general, is especially if it's balsamic, because balsamic, and even though it's not conjunct, it's almost conjunct. When it comes to balsamic phases, it's moving towards a conjunction. So it's building up the energy. There's often this sense of having no control over one's life in some regard because we're surrendering. And so the otherwise sometimes randomness of Jupiter itself can often be capped by this sense of I got to do something with it. And so with Saturn and Jupiter, there can often be this tension between wanting to just be free, but having this sort of grave sense of responsibility that brings more of a sombering awareness and a sense of restriction along with it. When you have the new phase, it can be a little bit different. There can be just a different quality, but there's a lot that's being given, a lot that's being completed here with that Saturn Jupiter.
Thank you.
Thank
That
you,
was
Lena.
perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Any further questions?
All right. Well, maybe I'll just close on one more song.
Okay.
This song is, it's sort of an example of my own Jupiter in the 4th house. Just the lyrics themselves express that attitude of optimism and seeing what's potential where I am. I am singing in my home. 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 I am home in my song. 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 La da 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 dee 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 dee. La da 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 dee 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 dee. La da 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 dee 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 dee. La da 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 dee 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 dee. I am singing to return. 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 I return to my song. 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 Dee 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 dee. Dee 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 dee. Dee dee da da dee 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 dee. Dee da da dee dee dee. Dee da da dee dee dee. All right. Thank you, everyone. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Ari. Thank you from all of us.
Thank you, Ari. That was excellent.
Thank you.